I am an avid reader, and I believe very, very firmly in what some people call restorative reading. In other words, when you're focusing very much on something academic or specific, that the best way to refresh the mind is to read very far away from it. And I discovered even as a child that if I had a challenging assignment to do for homework, that if I could let it sit for a while and read something that had nothing to do with it, somewhere along the line I would get an idea and I would come back fresh and quite excited. So I've kept that going through my adult life, and my reading is extremely varied. I love detective stories. I really overindulge in that, partly because they entertain, don't engage the mind, but at the same time, some of them are so well written that, I learned from them. But my favorite book, oddly enough, is not a detective book at all. It's one that I first read in English. And in English, it was called The Elegance of the Hedgehog. And I picked up that book because the title was so absurd. And I discovered it was a translation from the French, The Élégance du Hérisson, by an author called, I think, Muriel Berry, B-E-R-R-Y. Now, I think I've got that right, I'm not terribly sure. But I read it in both languages. And it was such an elegantly written book in both languages. In fact, the English version is the best translation I've ever seen of a book from the French language. The sentence structure still kept some Gallic flavour. The words were always le mot juste, and I got a great deal of pleasure out of the writing itself and out of the structure of the book. But the theme really intrigued me because it put a well-known theme right on its head. A traditional theme is where a person is one thing, maybe not a very good person who tries to pretend to be something else. Someone who isn't very learned trying to pass himself off as an expert or as a senior academic or something like that. This book is about a little concierge in Paris, and she is extremely intelligent. She's very widely and deeply read, and she has all sorts of challenging and stimulating thoughts, but she's a concierge. So concierge do not act like that. So she spends her time actually pretending to be a typical concierge. So she walks with a very heavy foot. She dresses in a very typically dull fashion. She buys concierge type food at the supermarket and then slips in when the shop is empty and buys gourmet food and so on. She's always seen at her loge reading something trashy, and she has her television on at some game show or something totally mind-numbing. And then when her tenants are safely out of the way, she then gets into her philosophy, and she has one or two very intimate friends with whom she can really let her mind be expressed and so on. And I just totally loved it. It was also written in two voices. While she was doing that, then every chapter then was alternated with one written by a teenager, 14-year-old girl, who was so bright and bored at school, and yet was going through the motions of getting good test scores and so on to please her bourgeois parents. But she had decided that on her 13th birthday, she was going to take her own life because she could not go on living like this. And the story was the two eventually came together. The 14-year-old girl, or whatever age she was, she lived in one of the appartements, and anyway, the girl found a reason to live, and that reason was go after learning for its own sake, because this concierge was getting no practical value out of it. So in a way, it fell into my own belief. And I think it's a superb book. I would really highly recommend it.